Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the host of the Sencast and the managing director of B Squared. We started the Sencast as a way to improve knowledge around SEND. Yes, there is lots of stuff you can go and read, but we're all very busy and we do not have the time. We created Sencast to try and help schools more inclusive as well, to help teachers be teachers of SEND and to help support staff be more aware. And the Sencast is also a great way to get the same consistent message to schools and parents. Every week on the Sencast, we have a different guest that I've invited to talk about a specific area. My guest this week is Danise Grant. Danise is an educational consultant. She's also a judicial official and a local authority SEND panel member, advocating for the rights and needs of children with SEND. And on this week's show, we're discussing SEND parent partnerships and the difficult relationships between LA, parents and schools. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Square, and as well as this podcast, we have our Sencast session, which is our online CPD. If you haven't accessed a Sencast session before, these are video CPD sessions, often with the same great guests as the podcast. We run 9 live sessions and 2 free SEND briefings every year. The sessions are £10 per school and you can watch live on the day or you can watch later. The video is yours forever. We have over 140 sessions you can purchase and use for CPD across the whole school. And for even better value, you can subscribe for £175 a year and access all of our CPD sessions. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing SEND parent partnerships. My guest this week is Danise Grant. Danise is a former secondary teacher and is now an educational consultant. She has a master's degree in policy studies and education and has worked in education for over 20 years. She is the founder of Panda's Tree, the UK's first organisation supporting the Black Down syndrome community. She's also a judicial official and a local authority SEND panel, advocating for the rights and needs of children with SEND. And finally, she has recently started her own podcast called The SEND Sisterhood. Welcome to the show, Danise.
Thank you. Good morning.
You are in a very fortunate position. Not everyone will say this, but you are in a fortunate position because you are a parent of a child with SEND, but you're also a former teacher and an LA SEND panel member, giving you unique insights into the system that will help you to advocate for your child.
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, you go.
Yeah, it is a unique position. I've in some cases, I've forced my way into the corners of the local authority, but I'm a really big believer in building relationships with different types of people and also getting as much knowledge as possible, in some cases through those relationships, so that you're able to be the best advocate you can be for your child.
Definitely. And the reason I say some people might not see it as fortunate is generally, I think when you have your child with SEND, you're on a journey. And generally, you have no idea where your journey is going. In reality, it's going to go somewhere. You don't necessarily know which direction. But I think when you're in that LA SEND panel and things like that, you can see children much further down the line who are being failed. And that could probably scare you that this is where I could end up with my child.
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting position to be in, because I think originally I sort of joined to just have knowledge about the SEND system, but from the LA perspective, because it was almost felt like it was the only area that I didn't really know that much about. There definitely are failings that happen, and I think people will probably want to sort of strangle me for saying this, but I think when you're actually sitting at the table in some capacities, now I sort of work with duality. In some capacity, I'm around the table as a panel member, but I've also had interactions with LAs as an advocate at the same time. And the unfortunate thing, which we already know about special educational needs and disabilities, is that it is an absolute postcode lottery. So we know this. Different local authorities have different budgets, they react different ways to things. Some are completely sort of blinkered with their heads in the sand and hoping that people just go away. and others will actually sit around the table and, and I can only speak for the one that I sit around, and actually really try their best to almost direct a child's pathway. Now, the good thing about being a panelist who's a parent is I'm able to actually more often than not say, hold on a minute, this is not what the parent is saying, or this is not what they would like, or have you looked at the voice of the child, because they've actually sent you a recording, of what they want to say, to kind of get the voice of the parent and the voice of the child sort of taken on board. I'm I'm mindful that not everyone can have everything. We don't have a system that allows for that. But I am a big believer in the ability that if the local authorities and parents and schools are able to work together in some form of unison, then it can work out. My own child is quite young at the moment, so exactly as you said, I've got foresight now into what the potential future can hold, and it is very, very scary. And it's scary mostly because of the cuts and the cutbacks. It's scary because the local authorities are under a lot of pressure in order to perform, and I don't feel sorry for them, because it's almost like that's your position. You're meant to be doing that.
Yep.
But they are under a lot of pressure to perform. And as such, it's the families that are suffering. And, over a year wait to go to tribunal in many cases. And then when you get to tribunal, the money that's wasted from all sides, because, 9 out of 10 times, the tribunal's like, local authority, you're wrong. Give them what you should have given them in the first place. So there are a few local authorities out there that are working to combat the road to tribunal. And in some cases, they will, sit around the room and say, is this going to go to tribunal? Okay, what can we do to prevent that? And there are others that continue along the wave of, well, let them go to tribunal and see what happens, knowing you're going to lose. You're more than likely going to lose, but they do it anyway. And it's almost as if they like wasting time, because ultimately the only person that's really suffering is the child and the family of that child as well.
I never get, I never understand, if your loss rate is so high, why are you still going? It's like being a tall person and headbutting yourself on the same beam again and again, and not going, you know what, I could duck.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, I could avoid this. Yeah, it's quite obvious this is going to happen. I know I'm going to go through here every day. I'm going to headbutt it. I could just duck, but somehow no.
No, and I think what I do is really important, because sometimes I will meet a parent and a family at the earlier stages of their journey, perhaps. So either pre-diagnosis or just sort of getting diagnosed, maybe going into the EHCP pathway. And even sometimes when you sit down with the school and you sit down with the parent and you pick apart what's happened, often or not, a lot of the times there's this sort of loggerheads between institutions, i.e. schools, and parents. But when you actually look at the documentation and you pick it apart, a lot of the issue comes from the creation of some of these documents and the body of some of these documents. And that unfortunately lies at the feet of the local authority. And it's for, in some cases, schools to kind of, when they get a rubbish EHCP, and trust and believe I've seen some that are not even worth the paper that they're written on, it's for the school to say, this can't work. And not that I can't meet the need of the child, but with what you have given this child as an outline to helping them access education in some way, shape, or form, this can't work. Go back to the drawing board, start again, and let's put something in place that actually will be suitable for that child and meet their needs and actually help them travel along the road to have some really successful outcomes. And I find that half of the time when the LA get in the room is if I'm in a school meeting, so in reverse. I shouldn't call it amusing. It's not, because it's people's lives, but it's interesting to see the look on some of the caseworkers where they're like, oh my gosh, why do they know all this? What's going on? This was supposed to be a slam dunk. Why am I coming out of here with all these work and extra meetings? Because no, actually, if you read between the lines of what you've written and given a family, it's absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And no one should accept nonsense for their child. So
I know with the session we've done, someone's asked, can you give an example of a good section F? And the consultant went, no, because I've never seen one. It's like, oh, come on. This has been for 10 years now. 10 years, EHCPs and is it 2014? It's like, come on. But in 10 years, not seen a good one because
yeah,
they avoid that concrete, specific language because that's another way
yeah,
they can get out of spending money and things like
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you were just saying then, that almost like that's the thing. I do think some local authorities think the parents do not know, so we can just kind of
Yes.
bamboozle them.
Yes. Absolutely. And it's such common practice. It's such common practice for them to, and I forgive me for saying them. I hate to use that word. It's like a them and an us, but it's such common practice. A lot of parents, especially if they're brand new to this Zen journey. So even if you've maybe perhaps got an inkling that there might be something. Let's take somebody who's undiagnosed, and you may have an inkling that there's something happening with your child, and you try and sort of get things moving for that child. It's so common for a parent to be completely overwhelmed, out of their depth. I've said this before in many different ways. Nobody comes into the world and has a child hoping that they've got a special educational need or disability. So it's not something that people are lining up and signing up for. They're just not doing that. And I think that the local authorities, in many cases, really have core understanding. It might even be in their training. I don't know, but it feels like it's in their training where, you will make this convoluted. You will make it difficult. You will not be able to, be understood or have them understand you. And then you will write the bare minimum, give the bare minimum, and then send them away and gaslight if they come back and say there's a problem. And it's almost like you're being trained to do this. I know they're not. They're probably not, but it feels that way on the other side because it shouldn't be such an uphill battle for people to get what they need.
I think it's really hard because you have the parent it's a very personal thing. It's their
Yeah,
child, their family, their home life, their child's future, everything about which is very raw, very personal. Then you have the legal framework and all that sort of stuff, which is there. And then you kind of got this kind of social bit, healthcare and medical. And it's really weird that it's very professional in terms of the social care, the legal, and the education,
yeah,
and all that stuff. Yet you've got a parent saying, this is what I need.
hmm
And you need to, I think the thing is, you need to be speaking the language they expect you to speak to
yeah.
succeed.
I mean, in my own personal case, and again, I am uniquely positioned. I probably come out of the gate swinging, if I'm honest. So I probably start off with the things that will make them the most uncomfortable. And then as soon as they read that first line or two, they instantly know, yeah, let's not try it with this one. And what does she need? And what does she you need to get? And that's what I really want. A lot of parents are walking around in fear of their, child not getting what they need fundamentally, but also in fear of being looked upon as a bad parent, in fear of, being told that, your expectations are too high or you want too much. And they're scared to, in some cases, to, the fear of even being looked upon as if you don't understand anything, because that's quite daunting to a lot of the parents that I work with, where professionals, and in some cultures especially, they're sort of, professionals are at the top just under God in some cases. So you're trained to listen to these professionals and do as these professionals say and don't question these professionals. And in some cultures that's really deep seated in them. And so parents get worried about, well, can I say that? Can I put that? Can I ask for that? Can I say that? Aren't they going to think this, and this? And then won't that impact my child? And for me, as you said, there's a lot of statutory guidance that is there to guide everybody. And I always look for what I need in a document, because once it's, whether it's in, the Children and Families Act or the Equality Act or even the Code of Practice, I look for what I need because guaranteed it's in one of those. And all you've got to do is slap that down on the table in front of the local authority. And they're like, oh, yeah, this one knows. It's sometimes just one phrase, and, you'll be able to turn it around in some cases.
But also, I think another part of that puzzle is you are comparing yourself to other parents and other families. You're being judged, you believe, by other parents and other families. And the moment your child isn't that perfect child in everyone else's
Mm,
eyes,
yeah.
you are starting to feel negative, like, well, perhaps this is my fault. Perhaps I am a bad parent. So you're already kind of on that back foot. Everyone
Yeah.
makes you feel this is your fault. If you just send them to school, if you just do this, if you just
Mm,
do this, you're already on the back foot. And you get into that meeting,
mm,
and you're not there filled with confidence.
not at all. And for me, I do spend quite a bit of my time sort of almost cheerleading parents, because a lot of the time, so I don't like to advocate in a way that makes somebody dependent on me, because I'd be a really overwhelmed and extremely busy individual if that was the case. I prefer to advocate in a way that hopefully helps the parents and trains the parents to be able to feel confident enough to go down that journey, to go down that road on their own, irrespective of where they are on that journey. So if it's a case of, a school is just saying they can't meet needs, then it's about picking that apart. Because as far as I'm concerned, schools can meet needs. What specifically is your issue as to why you're saying? It's a very common phrase that also comes up on panel: we can't meet needs. And I don't even know what that means, because actually, have you even looked at what they need and then looked at how you can perhaps meet that need? It's it's not rocket science, And sometimes getting parents to be thinking in a way that actually, I know my child, I know what they're capable of, but it's a slow process. It's like a slow drip. It can take a little while.
I think with that can't meet needs, it's a really ambiguous phrase, and and as Gary Freeman says, which you just touched on there, it's you don't really need to meet needs, you need to meet provision.
Yes,
Yeah. The
absolutely.
needs is you summarizing stuff which you're not quite sure on. So it's hard to argue about. Literally, no, I just need you to meet that provision.
Yeah,
That provision is this, this, this. I do not understand why that cannot be met here.
yeah. And it shouldn't be so difficult. If your child, for example, needs speech and language or OT, it shouldn't be, let's say, a geographic border that stops you from sending an occupational therapist to the neighboring borough so that child can have that need met. Because private therapists are going to be more expensive than the NHS one. So just send the person across the border. It shouldn't be a battle for people to have, a good level, because, we know speech is one of the main ones, a good level of speech provided, whether that's, there's many children in a school, those with or without EHCPs, that need additional help in certain areas. There's no harm in putting, a few of these kids together and having that session together, not at the expense of someone's EHCP, of course, but just generally, why don't schools have therapists inside, the way that we used to have, I'm showing my age, nursery nurses, or, why don't we just have these people, maybe at the school already, so that actually it doesn't become a thing of, oh, we can't give, we can't meet that need. Because to hear those words as a parent is almost mind blowing,
But
because,
when it is
yeah,
like, oh, we need a therapist, okay, cool. I found someone. It costs this much. There we go. Job done. We need this.
yeah,
Found someone. It's cost this much. Job
mm-hmm,
done.
mm-hmm,
So now I found you three people who would do the stuff required and it can be done here.
mm-hmm.
Why can you not meet the needs?
Oh, because we don't have a room.
And
I
that's
mean,
that's the thing. I do think schools almost, and I've heard this a few times, or it's might not be. It's they look at what they are currently,
yeah,
and what you're asking for does not fit into who they are currently.
the mold. Yeah,
And it's like, but you can change. You can
yeah.
grow the school. This isn't a one-off thing for that child. It's going to be becoming more common. There are lots of other things. So why can your school not adapt to suit?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that is a whole bigger thing around inclusion and results on league
Yeah.
tables to me, as well as other things. But it's that pressure to perform and get those league results, and anything which is kind of not helping them achieve that or getting in their way, they don't want to do, not because they don't want to do it, but because of the pressures from local authorities, maybe Matt, around those league tables, the results and that performance.
Mm. Well, in a weird way, I've just thought of this, so forgive me. Um, it's almost like, we have the Olympics and then we have the Paralympics, right? And why, if we have to have league tables at all, which, as you said, is a whole nother conversation, what's the harm in having a different type of league tables for different types of kids? I I struggle with, the concept. I mean, even as a teacher, the pressure inside school to make sure that you get, I guess was it 2 to 9 now, 1 to 9 or whatever it is now, but the original A star to C, the pressure to get that on you as a practitioner is intense. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, my former colleagues are not working their hardest, but I think when you bring up special educational needs in schools, in many mainstream schools, I'm not talking about special schools, it's the idea that this is work. When we train to be teachers, when I trained to be a teacher at least, there was no discussion on special needs, and there was no discussion on different types of cultures that you may, meet while you're in school. The sort of the blue line for teacher training is, borderline high achieving. It's set in at a particular class level or above, and it doesn't necessarily include those who are different in whatever way that difference may show up. And so when you get a class list, and let's say you've got a quite a high level of need on that class list, you don't even know what to do with it, because you've not actually been trained in how to adapt and how to manage. And one of the biggest arguments out there is that if you actually learn or teach teachers how to teach at a level where special needs kids can have their needs met, everybody gains from that. But if you, yeah.
But the problem is, as you said, that is a different thing to what you're taught. So you kind of go through this whole teacher
Hmm.
training, and this is what training looks like. This is what teaching looks like. This is what you do. And then you get to a school and you're like, well, that child is preventing me from doing it.
Yes.
And they have that. And then someone tells you there's a completely different way. And you're like, no, that's not what I've, and so we've got to get that initial teacher training to be inclusive from
Yeah.
the very beginning. It has
And
to
I
be
think
there from the very beginning.
And I think not only, to get it to be inclusive, but for those people who are still in the profession, because let's be honest, many people are not, but for those people who still are in the profession, I think there needs to be some peeling back. They need to train those who are currently there, because these are the people that get promoted, become the assistant head teachers and the head teachers, and then formulate a culture of, we don't do send at this school. Let's try and ship them off to the neighbouring school or someplace else or somewhere special. So I think it's also those who are currently in the professional need a look at what they're doing.
It'll be really interesting going back to the multiple league tables, if rather than just an overall kind of this is how we did, and maybe split into boys and girls, we do it into SEN,
Yes.
EHCP, but also diversity. You do all of them. And then we get a
Absolutely.
truer picture
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
actually, this is the mold, you have to fit him.
Yeah. And I think because there are so many forgotten entities to this, this puzzle, so to speak, you don't get the best picture. You get the picture that is almost, what's it called? It's almost been photocopied and given to you, for want of a better phrase. You don't actually get to sit there with your paintbrush or your pens and draw it out and map it out for what it really is. And as a result, children are going missing in education, for want of a better phrase, whether that's that they just no longer attend school. You've got a massive increase in people deciding to home educate because their needs, quote unquote, cannot be met in that setting. And that setting is, it's almost like when you, as a SEND parent, you always go to events and they say inclusive. And so you rock up there and you're happy and you're like, oh, yes, this is inclusive. And, we're going to have a great time here. And then you get there and they're like, yeah, it's inclusive for everybody, just not your kid, you know? And
It's
that's
inclusive
so
within this
common
band. It's inclusive
within
within this
this
band. But
band.
if you're below
Yeah.
that, sorry.
And anything more different than that, we can't help you. And that's literally how almost schools operate. We're inclusive within a certain region, but anything more complex, and some of these complexities are not even really that complex in many cases. But if it's anything different from what we know as the norm, then, we're not inclusive for you, actually. And we're going to have to either send you back to the LA, tutor you at home, or it's just hopefully you'll fall off and be forgotten about, and we'll just keep increasing our league tables to be what we want them to be. And I think there just has to be a massive change in how we think about inclusion in education in general. And it's not an add-on and it's not an extra. I've come to realize everybody's different. Everybody's got something, you know.
When we met at the TS show last year, we had a conversation around how you were never listened to as a parent until you kind of waved your jobs at them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to discuss that?
Not really, no, I'm joking. Yeah, I mean, it's very common, and I'll have to break it down into a few pieces. So it's very common as a special needs parent, and parents in general. I feel like people are not good at listening to parents in general. And then you add on the layer of being a special needs parent, where they take your worries, your woes, and your anxieties, and they basically fog them off as you're just an anxious person, or you're just somebody who worries too much. And then in my case, when you add on my ethnicity on top of that, for me, it gets magnified the extent to which I'm not listened to. And this has become a very common trend amongst the SEND community, where many parents, there's a massive part in the SEND code of practice that specifically says, listen to the parents. And many institutions, whether it's schools or local authorities, act like it's not written there. And they pretend that actually our voice is not as important as it should be, because we are the people who know the child the best. And as you said, I felt I don't like to do it. It's not something I don't like to wave the banner of accomplishments in people's faces. I'm very proud of myself, but I don't like to do that.
You shouldn't have to.
I shouldn't have to. I should be able to. And what if what if you don't have what I have? Then you're just constantly stifled and you're not able to get your child's needs met, because they see you as this, erratic person and also the stress that's involved. People often don't understand the level of stress that comes with being a parent of a child with additional needs. And it's relentless and it's daily. And in some cases, it will go on past the average. I've got friends who have had children already and their kids are, in the late teens, early 20s now. And I sometimes sit there and think, wow, you can send your kid off to uni, you can send them out to work. Many special needs parents may not ever get that opportunity to separate in a way like that from their children. So that pressure is a lifelong pressure in many cases. And then when you're dealing with a local authority that doesn't listen, a school that doesn't listen, then that impacts a person's mental health. I think I read somewhere recently, and forgive me, I don't remember where I read it, but the rate of suicide amongst special needs parents is on the increase. And it's on the increase because, they can't get their child's needs met. They're not being listened to at all. They're fighting, in some cases, housing, education, the local authority on many different fronts almost, to just try and get somewhere. And unfortunately, that leads to mental health breakdowns, which in some cases could have been quite, sometimes it's people who are what you would regard to as very, very, ordinarily balanced people. But the pressure that is involved in just being able to exist to a degree every day is causing people to consider ending their own lives. And I think that's something that people really need to think about.
It's shocking. And it is, I think, is you fight, as you know, who's being on that panel, is there's where my child is now, but what does that future look like? And if you're fighting and fighting and fighting and getting nowhere, and then you're literally going, my child is now 20 and I've got no support because I haven't got an EHCP. I'm trying to get help support from anywhere else. I've not got it. I'm getting older. What's going to happen? How is this going to work? What is going to happen when I'm not here? And there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of worries all around that. And it isn't a lot. You always have a rose tinted. I think when you find out you're pregnant or your partner's pregnant, you have the rose tinted vision of you literally see their life flash fall through your eyes, and you're literally in that vision. When you find it out, you're already seeing yourself as a grandparent type thing. You have that vision, and then at some point, that vision is taken away from you, and you've got a different reality, but you don't know what it's going to look like. And you had that thing, oh, I'll have my kids, and then we'll travel the world. Or we'll have this and then I'll do this.
Yeah.
And again, all these things get taken away from you, and you love your child, and you do. And it's not, but it's that adjustment, and you can't your life plan was on this way, your income and everything is limiting you in all of your options. And you need that support. And when you're being ignored, belittled, anything like that, it's just you are going to doubt your own sanity.
Absolutely. I mean, I attend meetings with parents. Usually it's the school that's setting it all up, and just even the other day, recently, I was in a school meeting. It's a school that one of those schools that wants to be private but isn't, and they sort of carry themselves in that way. And they see this child as defiant and reckless, and just all the negative connotations that can come when a child has needs that are not being met, if we're honest. And even in going in that meeting, and I hope the parent forgives me mentioning it, but just to meet with the Senko and just the I can only call it obtuse behavior. He wouldn't switch his camera on. And, this is 21st century post-COVID. So for me, it's not, where people are like, oh, my camera doesn't work. Sorry. No, your camera definitely works. And he wouldn't switch his camera on. And in the end, normally if you do have a problem, you'd say so. And in the end, I had to say, I'm so sorry. Is there something wrong with your device? And it was like, oh, yeah, it's not working. Now, there were many things I took from this person's demeanor. And one of this was, I was working with a family. It's a Black family. He did not think it was essential, polite, or necessary for him to show his face on the screen in this meeting. So my follow-up message to him was, can you make sure you have a working device the next time we are due to meet online? Because it's only polite for you to show your face. And then off the back of that, when he was on, he was sort of looking everywhere but at us and completely unengaged or disengaged. And then at one point I said to him, you've got all this hearsay about this child. Have you ever met him? And this Senko hadn't even met the child that we were talking about in 4 years. And so some people have this behavior when it comes to, and the poor parent was thinking that it was them. They were like, what am I doing wrong? Am I not behaving in the right way? Am I not speaking in the right way? Am I not getting my words out the right way? There's nothing wrong with this parent. It was all that individual, and dare I say it, that institution and the culture that they have built around special educational needs and disabilities. And unfortunately, that is one of many examples that I have experienced doing the work that I'm doing, where people are just, straight out the gate rude and disrespectful. And to add on to that, you're uncaring in a role where, you should at least, bare minimum, teachers should care, and they just don't. And as a result, that parent is losing their mind because they think it's them and they internalize it all.
That's the type of school you said, that device was working. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They are such prestigious, they wouldn't have equipment which doesn't work. You
Mm-hmm.
know it's going to work. You know that they have a conference room with a word love to speak. You kind of probably know what that's up.
Mm-hmm.
For the Senko to not meet the child in 4 years, yeah, the Senko is supposed to be the advocate in your school for your child.
Precisely.
Almost like fighting against everyone else, it's kind of the norm. But the Senko should have met that child. How can you have a meeting about a child you haven't met?
Never met. Yeah.
I kind of get it when you are, is he getting up to tribunal level? Yes, you're going to yes. But when you're having a school meeting, how are you having a meeting about a child you haven't met?
And unfortunately, as I said, this is common practice. These kids are entities on a piece of paper in many cases. Their parents are almost, given the titles of, combative and rude and angry, whatever it may be, when in reality, a lot of the time, the individuals who work at the school just don't take the time to either get to know the child, to get that, to build that relationship with those parents, and as such, do work in a way that is, cohesive, working collaboratively to make sure those needs are met to the best ability of everybody involved. And so when parents are there, thinking, this in this case, the parent was kind of like, if you've met my child, you'll know, that, the child has unmet needs. But just that outright refusal, because it's that this is what they're taught in that setting. This is how they've almost been trained post teacher training. So we need to do something. We have to do better. There needs to be some uniformity in how people are trained regarding, special educational needs. You wouldn't sort of say you're a surgeon but never have done any training. Because, I'd be worried if you tried to cut into me and you're like, yeah, I've got the title of surgeon. you know, that's not going to cut it. And it shouldn't be similar when it comes to education. You can't just have these titles but know nothing. And unfortunately, there are too many people in schools that have titles but know nothing.
No comment. There are some amazing people. There really are. And I know that when you go to things like the TES show and any SEND conference, you're generally seeing the same people, the people who get it.
Yes.
If we actually worked out as a country the percentage of Senkos who actually go to a out of authority, out of trust training session in some form, conference or exhibition to upskill themselves, it'll be probably not as high a number as you think. And then if you actually had ones where it wasn't like it was a conference where everyone forced to go, almost like this, the elective, again, it's probably not anywhere near as high as you think. And I know that when you are in a room training Senkos, you are training the people who are already converted. You're training the people who care, who are passionate, who are probably listening to this podcast going, it just doesn't happen. And it probably doesn't in your school. But there are schools where this does happen, and they are the people who are hard to reach because that Senko in that school who isn't listening, who haven't met the child, is probably being told they're doing a good job by the senior leaders because the level of SEN is low. And so it's that really mixed message from the people around you on what is a good job. It's really hard when you have such diverse schools when someone criticizes someone in the role, the person who's listening is the person it's not aimed at. Because the person who's listening is a person who's trying to improve themselves, but they take offense at it. It's like, no, we're not. No, trust me, the people who are listening to this podcast, you are amazing. You're listening to this because you're passionate and you care, and you'll be shocked at the things that are happening in other schools. But it does happen.
But do you remember when many years ago now, when safeguarding was, way, way high up on the agenda, and everybody was being told it's not a one person job, it's an everybody job, and everybody needs to be safeguarding and know all about it. And it's the same thing with special needs. It's not just one person's job. It's an everybody job, and everybody needs to, to have that training, whether it's bespoke training or, other. There should be a criteria. You can't teach unless you know the ins and outs of what this is like, and also split that criteria up. So you've got the child, you've got the family around the child, you've got sort of learning needs or different types of learning needs, and just split it up so that people actually understand each of these things. That mum who comes charging into reception, before the end of school, and is probably mouthing off, for want of a better phrase, about whatever is happening. It may not even be that thing. It's just that there's so much that's happened around that day. The local authority have denied something. The doctors wouldn't see your child. There's many. These are things that I think if my former colleagues knew kind of what happens once they leave school, there's a whole life outside that people. I feel like if you know more about that, you're less quick to judge and you're more likely to help.
And
And that may be my sort of, we are the world point of
no,
view, but yeah.
I am Mr. Horizontal. I'm Mr. Laid Back. I generally just go in and life is good, and probably because things kind of are fair and life are good. But there are times where I'm not that person. I go in with my guns drawn. I'm going, and that's how this meet. But I can tell you the very few times I do it is when I know I've got to do the fighting. So if that parent is coming in that way, they've not been listened to before. They've not been
Yeah.
heard before. They've tried the polite route. It hasn't worked. So they're coming in this way. Generally, no one goes in the first level like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe round 3, 4, 5, 6.
Of not being listened to. I do agree. Yeah.
That's the thing. When
Absolutely.
someone's like that, they've not been listened to. Yeah. And what does not being listened to mean? It's not you just nodding and going, yes, that's shocking or anything. It's an action after that.
And it's accountability.
It's that there is listening in the moment and there is listening by action. And it's that listening by action is a very big thing that I think people kind of forget, that you said you would do this, or you said I don't have to worry, but I need to see something change so I don't have to worry. But when that doesn't happen, well, you're not listening to me.
Yeah.
We had a lovely meeting. You said loads of things. It made me feel really good. I went away happy, came
Nothing
back,
happens.
nothing changed.
Yeah. And I more often than not, that is the situation. And it just shouldn't be. I
No.
think, I spend a lot of my time following up, which again is just labor intensive for any SEN parent. I go to a meeting, whether it's myself or somebody else, and I have to follow up. I have to remind. And some people are great, and once they get that follow up, they action it. And some people you're following up for 6 months to a year and nothing is happening and nothing has changed. And you've complained all the way up to the governors and nothing has happened and nothing has changed. Because also, along with that, there's been absolutely zero accountability for people's actions or inaction in terms of them, doing their job, listening to the parent, helping the child. And I think it's unfortunate where I guess there doesn't seem to be, I'm in school mode, so the word sanction comes to mind, but there doesn't seem to be, sanctions for this, right? It's if you don't do something for a parent, any parent, but a parent of a SEND child, and they've been in a situation for over a year. There's no, you're not losing your job. Your head isn't rolling. It's just to sort of shrug it off. My bad. Oh yeah, I'll get to that next week.
Isn't that what they don't like the kids doing?
Precisely. Precisely.
Okay, I'm going to move the conversation on to Panda's tree.
Okay.
So what is Panda's tree?
So as weird as it sounds, it took me a while to land on that name. You wouldn't guess it by knowing it, but yeah. So Panda is actually the pet name for my daughter. She may hate this as she gets older, but however, I do say Panda and she now turns around and responds. But it's a pet name for my daughter, and the tree represents in my mind what a community can be. It's got branches, it's got leaves, it spreads, it grows wide. Pandas Tree is a community organization that works to advocate, empower, and educate members of the Black community, so African and Caribbean community, those of African Caribbean descent, with a loved one who has Down syndrome. And I started Pandas Tree not very long after having my daughter. So my daughter has Down syndrome. And I started it because I was in many sort of mainstream groups and settings where the more I stayed in them, the more it became apparent to me that, again, my voice wasn't heard, listened to. There were things that were said that I wasn't comfortable with because it's almost like they forgot there was a Black person in the room, where I even went as far as approaching some of the larger Down syndrome organizations, and they just weren't interested in the intersection of race and disability. And the reality is, yes, you have disability as sort of an overarching umbrella that impacts and affects everybody. But when it came to the Black voice, and I'm very specific about this, I'm not in a position or capacity to do BAME. I'm not a big believer in BAME personally, but when it came to my voice and those of parents like myself, there was just nothing there for us. And it was almost as if what was given to the general population was meant to be a one size fits all. But knowing culturally, my people don't like to talk outside a lot. And I think if you flip it on its head, some of these larger groups that are made up of predominantly white people who are happy to talk amongst themselves, if you kind of look at it that way, we don't often get that. And it can be really low level. It could be in a Facebook chat, and your little picture's up there and you put in a question and it's white noise. And then along comes Karen after you and there's 55 responses. And it could be the same question that you just asked. Just that people don't want to respond to you.
Well, I think it could be honest, they don't respond, or they're going, oh, well, I don't know in your situation. And this is the thing, technically, I believe, Down syndrome in a Black person and Down syndrome in a white person is the same.
Yes.
As you said, the difference is the cultural attitude towards it.
Yes.
And had this on a podcast we did previously, and I kind of did some research around why if you're Black, why are you less likely to be diagnosed with dyslexia? And it was around the cultural kind of stigmatism. It was around knowledge within the community. It was around it was really interesting finding out. And it's not about actually, I need a different way of doing this. It's kind of actually, it's the cultural side you're trying to infer. And what you're saying is you're doing this bit, which reaches all these people, but you're asking them to do a bit more to reach more people in a way that works for them and help them to see that the stigma should be going. There shouldn't be that stigma.
Well, if I'm going to be brutally honest, I mean, stigma can be present in any cultural group. So it may be higher in some than others, but it is present in any cultural group. I do absolutely think that yes, there are stigmas attached to having any disability or any difference in our community, in the Black community. And that is something that I'm very passionate about championing and saying, actually, it's it's not that bad over here, guys. You're gonna get days where it might be, but overall, it's not that bad over here. And I think that it's two-sided. When you look at the majority, the dominant ethnic group, and something goes out there. When I think of Down syndrome, my child is never included. When you look at publicity, it's usually a white child that's got blonde hair, blue eyes, and a little pokey tongue, and and looks incredibly cute. Children like mine, it's almost like it's not perceived that they can have Down syndrome as well. And so I think that's where we kind of, yes, there are cultural elements to it, but then there's also inclusive elements to it. So I remember doing something for the National Down Syndrome Policy Group, and I will name and shame. And what was it? It was like just an online something or another. And they had all these pictures up of people, various ages. So they had the age tick box with Down syndrome. And not one photograph, not one image was a person of color. And that was a massive oversight for people who do policy of all things to not even think that if I'm filling out a form, I might want to see somebody that looks like me. I might feel like, oh, because there's an image of somebody who's Black or Asian on this form, they're like me. I might want to fill out the form even more. I might want to show up to things even more. So I think there's an element of, yes, there is a stigma attached in many cases, but there's also the lack of inclusion and the thoughtfulness that comes with inclusion, that it's not just, it doesn't fit everybody if it's just a dominant ethnic group. And that's the issue that a lot of the parents that I work with have had.
And this is what the thing is, one of those things that being a white male completely oblivious to. Anywhere I go, any job, any profession, anything I'm doing, there's going to be a white male.
Yes.
If you're a white female, much more these days, we're everywhere. And it's nice because it tells you, I can do that. My child is seeing them and going, I can do that.
Yes.
So there is something about when you are not included, when you are looking around and going, okay, everyone's white. That's not me. It does. You have to sit there and go, if you stop seeing who you are around, would you feel included?
Mm.
And it's one of those things when you are so used to it, like you never think of it. And it's that realization that actually I'm happy there. I can go do this because almost like I could see myself doing it because there's someone like me doing it.
But I think also, for my own child, I didn't want her exactly that. I didn't want her to be looking around and feeling like she was the only person in the village, so to speak. I wanted her to be aware of other children who come from her ethnic and cultural background that have the same condition as her, and for those kids to feel in kind that way as well. But I do I do agree that in some cases, when as I said, I've approached a lot of organizations about this. And what happens is it gets foo-fooed away for disability. That's what's important. Because in many cases, as you say, being a white male, your first introduction to to discrimination of some sort or issue of some sort may be disability, whereas, especially with Down syndrome, and I've said this before elsewhere, we're a minority within a minority within a minority. And so there's we don't get those spaces to exist in a way that's comfortable and in a way that allows us to, we're not saying we need to segregate ourselves completely from, the Down syndrome world or group. That's not what this is about. But it's also I've met a lot of organizations that when I've approached with this very thing, I've been met with combativeness. It's not about race, it's about disability. We're going to need you to go away. We're not going to invite you to anything. We're going to act like you're not there. And no, I very much am. Hi, I'm very much am here, and I'm not going anywhere either. So since that lack of inclusion was there, I was like, I'll start my own thing, and it's a tiny little thing, but I've been doing it for about 3 years. It's not massive because again, there's not a massive group of Black people with Down syndrome in the UK, but there has been that outreach to the Caribbean and to parts of Africa as well. So it's working in terms of the cultural aspects of it.
But we see the impact in media of seeing a different representation and what that means. And also it means that I also learn a lot. When I can never remember her name, there was a deaf lady on Strictly. I'm
Yes.
rubbish at names because I'm not really paying that much
And I
attention.
don't watch Strictly, but I know who you're talking about.
That's the thing. And that's the thing, you learned a lot. It's like, well, how did she listen? It was a feeling and things like that. And you watched and learned. And it was really interesting. On this year, there's one of the dancers, comedian, really kind of visually impaired. And you're going,
Mm.
wow, actually he's got, and it just helps you think. So
Think differently,
representation
yeah.
is really good.
And it is, and it shouldn't be something that people are afraid of. You know, unfortunately, when you think about a group of Black people coming together, often that invokes fear in many people in the world. I have no idea why, but it does, unfortunately. And, you know, it more so is just people saying, you know, we want to be seen, heard, and included, and not in a way that's tokenistic, right? We don't, just because I'm sitting here today saying that we need to include Black and brown people who have Down syndrome, please don't go away next week and just invite one person around the table who you may then discreetly fire in the next 4 weeks. You know, like it has to be sustainable and it has to be real. And very few people are like yourself, where that openness, exactly as you said, that openness to learning about the difference in people's journeys, just based on an additional difference that they have that perhaps doesn't impact you, is why I chose to exist in that capacity.
So I was trying to say it in different ways. So if there was a big meeting with loads of people whose children had Down syndrome and loads of tables, and then kind of there are 8 Black people there, they might choose to sit at the same table. Might. Various other factors, but also might. And then they'll have those conversations, and the conversations they're having, they'll be able to relate to it. They've gone through that experience. They've had that stigmatism. They've not seen that. But in reality, let's say there was a whole load of decisions being made, you'd probably make the same decisions as most other people in most situations. You're not, as you said, you're not asking for anything different. It's that relating, that I'm having a slightly different experience to you, and I would like to find someone else having that same experience so we can all moan together.
I mean, people ultimately, right? Nobody likes to be ignored. Everybody wants to be heard, if we're brutally honest about it. And, you know, even if we take that scenario of having a meeting with, you know, 80 people and 10 of them are Black and sitting on the same table, if you look around you, you know, my maths is terrible, but the other 70 people are white and all sitting on the same table. So the reality is, it's just the fact that even if you turn to table Black and say, you know, what do you guys think? You know, one of a better phrase, then at least that voice is saying, well, hold on a minute, our experience of this has been different because there is that additional layer of ethnicity or race that's applied to it. But exactly as you said, you know, if people, especially with Down syndrome, if you're having heart problems, sight problems, you know, all sorts of, they're going to be the same because everybody's a human being. You know,
Yes.
they're going to be very similar. But it's that experience of the treatment at the hospital that you may get versus somebody else. It will be the how much is your voice. I mean, I had an experience where a doctor tried to tell me that he was going to perform a procedure on my child without any general anesthetic. She was probably maybe one and a bit. And I had to say to him, and I'm trying to say what type of exam it is in case she listens when she gets older, but it was a very invasive exam, if I put it that way. And I had to say to them, I'd say to him, you know, it's almost like you believe that even as a child, a Black child, she has a high level of threshold, you know, pain threshold, which is common. You know, we hear this with all the maternity arguments. And I had to say to him, if this procedure was performed on you without general anesthetic, how are you going to feel about that? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I wouldn't. And it's like, yeah, but you think it's okay to inflict pain on my child. But if this was you or your child, you'd be fighting for the general anesthetic that I'm fighting for right now. It's not nice to put your kids under. I've done it way too many times. But it's that thing of, I need to be listened to. And also as a parent to have that internal voice that says, right, if you're not listening, get me somebody else who will,
And
because I'm not dealing with you.
and as you said, you're not saying to them you're completely wrong. You're saying if you're in a situation, you'd be doing the same as me. So why are you not
Yeah.
listening?
And that's happened a lot to me, a lot. You know, I'm not alone in that at all.
So we started on parent partnerships. We segued off in various other directions, but it's that being heard, and it's a really big thing. And as I said, being heard is generally action afterwards. That's the thing about being heard. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's about those building those relationships, and that requires the action to build the relationships. Having a meeting every so often and ignoring someone is not building relationships. And yes, the parents might not be right. There are times where they do not know. They are the expert in their child, but they're the expert in their child when they're around, and other situations, like my daughter is one way at school and one way at home. So there are times, but whatever they're saying is generally very valid. And there are times where it's sometimes I find with people is what someone's doing and what's being communicated can be very different.
Mm.
So if someone says you're not doing this, is it a case of you're not doing it, or is it a case of you are doing it, but you haven't communicated it, which means they feel you're not doing it? And a lot of times that comes in, that actually something is happening, but because the parent has no idea, they're going to say it's not happening because no one's communicated.
I think we have to also remember that, and you have hit the nail on the head, in terms of relationship building and everything, communication is so key to people in general, but to send parents, I think it's really, really important, because sometimes if your kids are nonverbal, for example, you need that interaction, that communication from somebody else to be able to say, this is what's happened today and this is what's gone on. And I get that professionals may not always have the time, because I'll be brutally honest, it's sometimes unintentional that the communication doesn't happen. But in order for things to progress, you do have to, I think have a two-way communication is always very nice, where you're being listened to and the conversation carries over, you're listened to again, and then and then that's how you create a bond, a relationship. And, you start to feel like, actually, I'm being heard as well. And then things can hopefully happen for your child.
Definitely. And that is, being listened to does not mean doing exactly what I've said. It means taking what I said into consideration. It might mean I need a bit more information. It might mean I need a little tweak. It's whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, I'm right.
Absolutely.
That's not what it is. It's just about, I've said this. If I can see any change, I know you've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be, oh, can you just, my sister always had things where a school trip would be organised. It'd be sent out, and she's looking at this school trip going, my son's going to hate this. And she'd wait. And like 3 days before the trip, she's like, so what adaptations have you made for my son? They're like, why? And that was the thing. It was again and again and again that this would happen. And she's like, they're never changing. And it's that's all she's asking for, is they would have to make the adaptations at the last minute, which is always stressful. They couldn't prepare it. Yet they made the same mistake again and again.
You've not learned from it.
Yeah. And that's what's being listened to. Is generally, my sister had a very good point then. She had a completely valid point, because if they didn't make any adaptations, it would have gone a nightmare. Mm-hmm. It would have kind of ruined the school trip, because one person would have been that child. They wouldn't have had the staff. It would have been just not good for anyone. And it wasn't because it was my nephew's fault. It was because it hadn't been planned. And my sister would wait and then get, but the listening was, take it into account, so it's better thought out earlier.
And I think also on the back of that, let's not forget, in particular with ASC or ADHD, there are parents that are just finding out that they've got these conditions as well, as they're finding out off the back of their children's diagnosis more than often than not. And it's just sometimes, these conditions require you to communicate differently. Yeah. So don't just, I wouldn't necessarily call myself neurodiverse, but don't just talk and talk and talk and talk and expect the parent to pick that up. If perhaps they need it bullet pointed, perhaps they need it written down, because they may not assimilate information in that kind of way. And that's where the relationship building comes in, because if you get to know the person, you get to know how they communicate and what works for them and then what does and what doesn't, so you can work along that trajectory and actually make things happen for the kids in a way that's successful and not lastminute.com, hopefully. Because there are many, people like myself, I don't like last minute. So I get your sister's stress.
But she would give them chance. She'd go, they'll contact me. And she wouldn't see, she didn't go straight in. You haven't done this. She'd always give them time and wait, hoping.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on the show today, Danise.
Thank you for having me. It's been
really
wonderful.
Enjoyed it. As always, you will find my guest contact details and more information in the show notes. There's information about Panda Trees and also her own podcast, which is the Send Sisterhood, which is you and another mum just chatting about how wonderful life is.
How enjoyable and random life is.
So you'll find a link to that in the show notes as well. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sendcast website. Thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And you can find links to subscribe across different podcast platforms on our website. And please follow us on social media. Just search for the Sendcast and you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And before we go, I would just like to remind you to check out Sendcast Sessions with over 100 great video CPD sessions. And if you haven't accessed a Sendcast session before, these are video CPD sessions done with a PowerPoint, typically, often with the same great guests as we have on the podcast. We release 20 sessions a year. 9 of these are live that you can join in and be part of the Q&A, and 2 are free Send briefings. The paid for sessions are £10 per school, and you get to watch live on the day or watch later on. They are yours forever. It's a really great way to get CPD around SEND to all staff. And don't forget, for even better value, you can now subscribe for £175 a year and access all our CPD sessions. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. It is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.